Okay, our recording is ready.
Yes. Hey, Rose, how you doing?
I'm doing okay. It was a busy day for me. I actually delivered a webinar yesterday
Nice.
and had trouble with PowerPoint trying to get it up. Thank goodness we only had 11 people, but still. And it surprised me. I got through all the material in like a half an hour instead of an hour.
Oh, wow.
The questions in 15 minutes. I was so happy.
Yeah. Great.
So that was good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know why I had so much trouble trying to get the PowerPoint up. It was strange.
Sometimes, yeah, it just is what it is.
Yep. So,
yeah.
And we muddled through, and that's all you can do. But I'll tell you, I'm so glad we have Raquel, because she is so good with this stuff. And what they do is they give us flyers for the different chapters in the different areas. And then we get credit for the registrations in our areas because the links are different. I don't know how they do that. So they have different links for us coming in here, and they have different links for the different chapters for the registrations.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, so they don't have to figure out, does this one go here? Does it go there? It's just automatic. So they're really good with this stuff.
Yeah.
They do all the webinars for Westchester.
Nice. Oh, that's
and Westchester does them often.
Sounds like it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But this thing, doing it with the other chapters really works. We get a lot more people because if we do it individually, we get maybe 8, 10.
Yeah. It works to partner. Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm surprised nobody's called in yet. Oh, we have 31 attendees. Okay.
Hi, everyone. You are definitely in the right place here. If you are looking for the grant funding for businesses and NGOs and myths and truths, we'll be starting in a few minutes. I'm Holly Rustick, and I'm here with Rose, our host for your Hudson Valley.
Hi, everyone. This is Rose. If you like, type in the chat, what's your business and where are you calling in from? We'd like to hear from you. We have 34 people on the call. This is going to be an exciting call with Holly and learning about grant funding.
Yes, really excited. We see we have a high enrollment today. So this is really exciting. I'm really honored to be the guest speaker here today. We'll be talking about grants. So do get ready, be tuning in. You're investing in yourself, right? Your time in yourself this morning. So hopefully we'll be able to find some grants for your businesses or nonprofits today, and you can find out more about grants. So thank you again for Rose for hosting me today and the Hudson Valley SCORE chapters of New York. And it's really exciting to be here. Thank you, Rose.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I'm just going to say welcome to a few of you. Hi, Lisa. Hi, Wayne, Arabella, Alan. If you can, type in the chat, what's your business and where you're calling in from. Hello, Andrea. Hi, Ian. Oh, we have another Holly. John Amodio, John Chester, Joyce Joyner. Oh, we have a lot of great people on this call.
It does look like the chat is disabled at this point in time, so people are typing in the Q&A, which is fine. So I had a question from Arabella calling in from Brooklyn, wondering if the webinar is applicable to Kings County. Yes, it is. We are talking in general about grants, so do tune in. We'll be talking about the misintrusive grants. I'll be talking about different places to find grants, what are grants, the different types of grants, etc. So it is general. It will apply to Kings County as well, and to any county that you're in.
Okay, and we're getting the chats in here. Somebody from Shokan, a nutrition counselor and wellness coach. Orange County, somebody starting a home inspection business. We have Dana, and she says, good morning. Success in English, LLC.
Nice.
Carrie, my partner, can attend. Will a recording be available? Yes, it will. We will send you a recording along with the slides within 2 days of the presentation. Arabella has an art gallery. Tasha Scott. Good morning, Tasha is an RN. Cheyenne and Zach, a pottery business. Hi, Terry. Renee Green, a mental health professional. Andrea. Hello, Andrea. Okay, keep popping in here. We'll start in just a couple minutes. If you're tuning in, we're going to be talking about grant funding for businesses and NGOs, myths and truths. We have Holly Rustic, who's very knowledgeable about all of this.
Yes, grants are a lot of fun, and they can bring in a lot of funding and supplemental support for your businesses or your nonprofit organizations. So it's really exciting to see the different organizations, all the way from pottery to art galleries, et cetera, mental health, nursing, and more that are sharing and are on the call today. And I did see a couple of questions about, is it applicable to different counties? Yes, it is. This is information that can be used pretty much anywhere. So, I mean, basically in the United States and the territories, we will be focusing a little bit on federal and foundation that apply in the United States. However, if you are calling in from outside of New York State, maybe in Canada, some of this will be applicable to you as well, and some of the general information that we have available today.
We have somebody here from Timothy from South Carolina. Welcome.
And even South Carolina will be applicable. So there you go.
Okay. So we have 84 people in. Why don't we just start, Holly? That's okay with you? So welcome, everybody. I know there's going to be a few more people joining us as we go forward here. I'm Rose Rubin. I'm the chapter chair for Ulster SCORE. That's Ulster County. And you're tuning in to grant funding for businesses and NGOs, myths and truths. So it's sponsored by the Greater Hudson Valley chapters, as well as Staten Island, Long Island, and Queens. And we're proud to introduce Holly Rustic today. She's a world-renowned grant writer and expert. And I've heard her speak before. She's very knowledgeable. She's also a best-selling author. She loves to coach people and enhance their grant writing, nonprofit and business skills. So she has two decades of grant writing and nonprofit experience. She's a popular keynote speaker for events all over the world. And just so you know, Holly is calling in from Guam this morning. It is late at night there. She's been featured on a myriad of podcasts, has her own podcast, and her podcast is a top-ranked grant writing and funding podcast, and it's just secured millions of dollars in grant funding for nonprofits around the world. So we have somebody who really knows what they're doing today. Just to introduce SCORE, SCORE is sponsoring this webinar, and our goal is to foster vibrant small businesses through free mentoring and education. SCORE is an organization sponsored by the Federal Small Business Administration. We work with anybody from startups to established businesses. Our volunteer mentors have a wide range of industry experience and areas of expertise to draw on. And on this next page, you'll see our chapters. You will be getting these slides. You will be getting the recording. So you will have this. You can contact your local SCORE chapter. If you're not in this area, in another area, go to score.org and you can find a chapter there. Okay. So how this webinar will work is everyone will be muted during the presentation. As we go, please submit questions and comments using the Q&A, not the chat button, because we just disengaged the chat button. And we'll look for your questions as it goes along. We do have a Q&A section at the end. So do know that you're going to receive all the slides in the recording within 2 days, and stay on for the Q&A. At the end, we will be randomly choosing several people to receive Holly's book. Holly's book is called The Beginner's Guide to Grant Writing. So we'll be choosing some people from the list of participants at the end, just randomly. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Holly. Go for it, Holly.
I really appreciate that. So once again, you are here in the right place. If you're looking for grant funding for businesses and NGOs, Miss Intruce. Thank you again to Hudson SCORE chapter for having me today and hosting me, and for sharing this knowledge with you guys. This is really great resources that you have. So here we go. Let's get into it. So I have a question for you. So we have about 100 people on the call right now, and we're going to drop in a little poll here. But basically, I'm thinking about, so you have a poll here. What is your interest in grants? So you have some different selections you can choose from. And then when it comes to grants, which of these statements resonates the most? I don't know where to start. I don't know where to find them. I don't know how to tell if we are eligible for funding. The entire grant writing process is overwhelming, or all of the above. So if you could just take a minute of your time here, Raquel's going to be monitoring on the back end, and she's just going to be able to see this. But if you could just take a minute of your time to say, what is your interest in grants? You own a business and you want to secure grants for it, or you own a business and you're interested in maybe opening a nonprofit arm to your business. You work at a business and you're interested in writing grants. Or maybe you work at a nonprofit and you want to secure more grants, or you want to get paid to write grants and open a consultancy. So maybe just something that fits you in the best way on those two questions. If you could just take a minute of your time to answer those, that would be great. And then Raquel can let us know on the back end what that looks like. So we'll give you about 30 seconds here to kind of answer that. And here we go. She is now sharing this. I believe everyone can see this. So it looks like we have a lot of people here, 54%, who own a business and want to secure grants for it. Followed by, a tie, working at a nonprofit and want to secure more grants, and then other. So that might be professionals, that might be something else. And number two, when it comes to grants, which of these statements resonate? 35% just don't know where to start. So that's our winning place today. And then followed by all of the above, right? Which is quite common. So thank you for taking a minute, because I want to know exactly who's on the call today so I can really talk to you guys directly. All right, so I'm just going to close this out now. But basically, this is what I was asking you. Someone thinking about starting a business and wondering if it's better to start a nonprofit, right? There's always that too. If you're thinking about starting a business, but then you're like, or should I start a nonprofit? Which would be better? Which would be easier to secure grants? Which would be easier to operate? Sometimes this is what 34%, I believe, right, of you guys said, are a current business owner and wondering how to get grants. And then, of course, nonprofit leaders are also on the call today, wondering how to increase funding. So we're going to be talking about this in general today, to really look at answering some of these questions here and addressing your concerns when it comes to grants. All right, so as Rose noted, and I'm not going to spend much time here at all, but I just wanted to let you guys know that the book is there, The Beginner's Guide to Grant Writing. So she will be raffling off 4 of those paperback books for you guys today. So do stick around to the end so you guys can be entered into that raffle. And for other grant writing resources, we also have our Grant Writing and Funding podcast. It's been around since 2017, so you're going to find heaps of stuff there for your grant writing services or more interesting grants. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today then, what we're going to cover in this short, we're going to go about 40, 45 minutes, And then we're gonna have time for questions. We may even finish a little bit earlier because I really want to give ample time for questions today. But we will be answering questions at the end. But if you have questions throughout, throw them in the Q&A, and Rose will be sure to get to those when we're in our Q&A portion today. So we're going to go over what are grants. So we're going to be talking about federal and foundation, and then we're going to move into eligibility for grant funding, how to know if you're eligible. Then we're going to move into strings attached to grant funding, right? Is it all free money? Maybe not. All right. And then finally, we're going to say how to know if grants are a good fit. We're going to also look at the misintrusive grants here, and then we're going to enter into our Q&A. All right. So here we go, getting right into it. What are grants? And of course, we have to start with a baseline, right? So some of you may know, you may have gotten grants before. Some of you are in the nonprofit world, you may be familiar with grants. Some of you may not really know. You just know that grants are out there and you've heard the word kind of thrown around. So we're just going to break it down just to give a baseline. So when looking at what are grants, grants.gov, which is a federal website, they are looking at federal grants as a grant is one of the government's tools for funding ideas and projects to provide public services, stimulate the economy, and benefit the general public. Right, so that's it coming from government, from federal side. And that's really good for you guys all to know as well, especially for those of you who said you want to actually develop, grants for your business, because what is that doing? It's probably providing a public service, or it's stimulating the economy, which, that's a lot of focus right now, is how do we stimulate the economy? And of course, it could also be benefiting the general public. So I have an added definition here. I like to say a grant is money awarded for a particular purpose with specific rules in place. Let's not forget that part. That does not need to be paid back if those rules are followed. So that's the thing. And we're going to kind of look into that a little bit more today, because that's where I see sometimes people don't really understand grants, and we want to make sure before we spend a lot of time and energy in writing grants that we really understand the parameters of receiving those grants. Okay, so where do grants come from? Well, as I was just saying, federal, right? We're looking at federal grants. Some of your taxes go to grant programs, right? There's other types of funding that can come in. So federal government definitely gives out grants. State and local governments also give out grants. Foundations, so these are non-government entities, give out grants. Endowments, even businesses give out grants. Associations like the PTA, etc. There's a lot of different grant sources, right? A lot of monies that entities say, we want to give out, and basically almost like subcontract. And a lot of you guys are business owners here, so you're going to understand that kind of term more, as far as like, we're going to subcontract out to somebody to take over certain deliverables in a scope of work, right? And that is kind of like grants, but the federal government's basically, we're going to subcontract this nonprofit, right, to do what our mission is, but they're going to be able to have the boots on the ground to get it done, that nonprofit or that business that actually gets the grant. So let's break this down more then, because I really want you guys to understand, and especially a lot of you said you don't know where to start. So first we need to understand these different layers, and what we're going to be looking at in this section is federal, state, and foundation, because those are the three main places that your businesses and nonprofits will be getting grants from, okay? So federal, from the federal government, right? So that's pretty easy. But just to let you guys know what that looks like, there are 900 grant programs offered by 26 federal grant-making agencies. And these fall into 20 categories. So, and these federal grant-making agencies, they're gonna sound familiar to you. Department of Education, Department of Interior, right? Department of Defense, Department of Commerce. So we're going to hear some of these big federal names, and they're the ones that give out the grants. But underneath these 26 federal agencies are the 900 grant programs. So these agencies, there's only 26, they manage quite a bit of programs under that. So they don't just give out one grant, they give out many different types of grants. But to make it a little easier, there's certain categories, there's 20 of them, that these grants fall under. So if you guys are business here and you're thinking of writing a grant, maybe if you think Department of Commerce, right? And you're thinking of a workforce development plan, let's say, then you might look at your category could be employment, labor, and training, right? So these are just ways to kind of put them into like buckets. So, and you want to go to the specific federal agencies that would make sense for you and spend time there. So now let's go ahead and look at a place to find the federal grants. Oh wait, before I get there, no, I'm not going there yet, sorry. Okay, first I want to look at the grant funding trend, because a lot of you may, your next question is, this is great, Holly, there's these federal grants, there's these agencies, what about today though? Because what are we in? Pandemic, right? What happened to the funding? So in order to understand what type of funding is currently available, because with grants, we always follow what's going on in the world in contemporary and current events and all of that, because it affects and impacts the funding. We're seeing inflation, you know, like the largest in the last 40 years, all of this. So what's going on with grants? Well, in order to understand that, we have to look at 2019, right, to really get a baseline. So in 2019, there were 458,000 federal grants, only federal, this is not foundation or state, this is just federal grants awarded in the United States. That totaled $765 billion in grant funding only. Okay, so quite a bit of money. There's a lot of money in different from these 26 federal agencies, right? Gave out through these 900 grant programs, gave out $765 billion. So in 2020, and this is a rhetoric question because we don't have the chat box open right now, but just think about it. Do you think it went up or went down, the number of grants? Do you think the number of grants went up? Maybe, right? There was a lot going on, but was there reduced money? Like what happened, right? Was there more grants given out, less money? Well, let's have a look because I have the information here for you. Well, the number of federal grants went up. That's about nearly 30,000 more grants, right? Up to 482,000 plus. Now let's look at the funding though. So that's just the number of grants. Let's look at the amount of funding. $972 billion. So it's a little over, it's a little 972 and some change billion. So it definitely went up, not only in the number of grants, but also in the amount of funding. And of course that might be like, well, yeah, because there was more money pumped in from the federal government during 2020. Well, what about 2021? Did it kind of fizzle out? Is it going up? We know that there's a lot of different monies out there, but how is that affecting grants, right? Well, let's look at it. Actually, the number of federal grants went down slightly, but this is a good but, especially for you, and I'm going to tell you why in just a second. The amount of money went way up, 1.4 trillion in grants. So this means that yes, competition might be getting a little bit more up there because there's fewer grants, but still we're way ahead of 2019. If you look at 2019, we're still above the number of grants trending, right? And the amount has gone up substantially. We're looking at almost double, right? Like this is amazing. And that means that those grants that are out there that you can access, those amounts have also gone up, right? So that's a good thing for you when you're asking for grants. So that's kind of like, you want to have a pulse on what's going on. So does that mean there's a ton of grants, like any grants, and you can get any amount of money for any program you want? No. Okay, so we also need to address reality on that too, but to look at, okay, we know what the pulse is on grant funding. Now we look at foundation grants. Now this is non-government grants, right? This is not federal, it's not state. We're looking at, here's a picture of Bill and Melinda back in the day. and you know, private entities, non-governmental. So really important to say that these are also a great place for funding. A lot of people want to go straight from starting a nonprofit or never having written a grant from their business to directly writing a grant for $1 million from the federal government. And let me tell you, that's going to be like pretty much not going to happen. Okay, so there are also monies out there, even smaller federal grants to get, so you can build credibility, right? Or another way you can build credibility, of course, is partnering with organizations that have a large history of receiving grants, and you can leverage their credibility. You can create a memorandum of understanding with them, an MOU, right? And you can almost like be subcontracted under them to build your knowledge of grants and to build your portfolio of managing grants. But foundation grants are also another great place to get your foot in the door to grants. It can take a little bit of time to get your door into foundations, but once you get your foot in the door, it can be really, really powerful, because foundations, they like to continue to fund the same organization once they get to know them. And it's all about developing a relationship. So these foundations are private entities, non-governmental. So how many are there? Well, in 2019, there were more than 88,000 foundations out there. So there's quite a, and this is only in the United States. So there are quite a few, right, available in the United States for you also to apply to. So, and you may even want to, if it's your first time writing a grant, first go to a smaller, even community foundation. You know, like if you have a supermart that has an annual giving program where they give out grants of $5,000. The Walmart Foundation gives out a lot of grants, you know, very small mini grants, but it's building your portfolio. Because here it is, here's the kicker, guys. What funding sources want to know is, can you implement projects? Can you manage money, right? And that's basically what you have to prove. And many of you through your businesses, you might be able to already prove that. Those of you with nonprofits, even think of fundraisers, right? Because those are projects, that's money that you manage. So think of other things too if you're building your way up to grants, okay? So now let's look at what is the funding pulse on foundations. We looked at the federal government, number of grants going up, the amount of money is going up. What about foundations? Has that trickled down to private entities as well? Well, first off, let's figure out what a foundation is. It is a non-governmental entity that is established as a nonprofit corporation or charitable trust with a principal purpose of making grants to unrelated organizations, institutions, or individuals for scientific, cultural, religious, or other charitable purposes. Foundations have a little bit more flexibility in how they want to give. Their review process is also a little bit different than the federal government. It's usually their board of directors or a committee who is reviewing the grants. So they have a little bit more subjectivity to what they want to give to. Federal grant reviews, on the other hand, it goes through a peer review panel, it goes through a vetting, it goes up the ladder, etc. Both of them should be using certain criteria, we're going to talk about that in a minute, to score your grants. But foundations do have a little bit more flexibility in who and what they want to give to. So let's look at the types and purposes of foundations. I gave you an example, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Coca-Cola Foundation, the Ford Foundation, right? There's a lot of the big ones, but really powerful for you if you're new to receiving grants, those smaller community foundations, right? Those will help build your portfolio. And they might be easier to like know who's on their board of directors. If you guys are in these different chapters or chambers of commerce, etc., you can start meeting people that may serve on these board of directors and build those relationships that way. So all private foundations share these commonalities. So let's look at what they are. They are established for a charitable purpose and to provide donors with a tax deduction for their contributions, right? They're also getting that as well. They are managed by their own board of directors. They receive most of their financial support from and are normally controlled by their founders. They must make charitable distributions throughout their taxable year. And I know that what's going on right now is there's talks of increasing that threshold as well with the whole inflation thing. So it is worth it to kind of have your pulse on what's happening politically, socially, economically when you're looking at grants. So let's look at the funding facts. Here we have in 2013, foundations in the United States gave out $52 billion to for grants. In 2017, they give out $72 billion. And in 2019, $76 billion, right? So we are seeing the trends going up, but I know what you're thinking. What about the pandemic? What about post kind of like into our, as we're entering the era, maybe hopefully right post-pandemic, we're looking at an increase still. Okay, so we're looking at in 2020, giving went up from foundations 6.3%, and then in 2021 it went up to by 6.6%. So we're definitely seeing a trend that is kind of on par with the federal giving. And another thing to really showcase here that's really important for you guys when you're thinking about getting grants from foundations, I love this. I love what's happening. Okay, 2/3 of foundations have softened or removed restrictions on existing grants in response to the pandemic. And what that means is I've seen a lot more just general operating support, right? Because a lot of grants, it's about funding a program, right? Sometimes nonprofits or businesses, though, they say, that's great, but we don't really want you to develop another program to manage to be funded. What we're doing already has impact in our everyday operations. So we just want funding for our operations, right? And we're seeing a little bit more and more of that. And then, of course, we're seeing among the 236 foundations surveyed by the Center for Effective Philanthropy, 57% committed to making new grants as unrestricted as possible. Once again, kind of, and that doesn't mean there's no strings attached. I want to make sure on that. But what it does mean is that a lot of the bureaucracy that can be involved with grants, it is starting to lift, which is good news. Okay. All right, so let's move on to our second portion of today's webinar. So we talked about what are grants, what's the difference between federal and foundation grants, what the pulse is. Now let's look at the eligibility. How do you know if you're eligible or if a grant is a good fit for your business or your nonprofit? Let's figure that out, okay? How we can figure that out is looking at that grant application. And there are two acronyms, right? Because us grant writers, we just love acronyms. So government loves acronyms. FOA and RFP. And what FOA stands for is Funding Opportunity Announcement, okay? And RFP stands for Request for Proposal. You and your businesses may be familiar with RFQ, Request for Quote, as well, but RFPs are a little bit different because it's not about the lowest bidder. I want to make sure we address that here, especially we have a lot of businesses on the call. It's not about like an RFQ where whoever bids the lowest basically then gets the contract. No, grants are very different. It really is about what you bring to the table. And, you know, it's not about how you can pinch your pennies all over the grant. That will actually work against you in grants. As a federal grant reviewer myself, I've looked at grants, and if I see nonprofits or organizations trying to pinch pennies, and then I wonder if the program is achievable, okay? Achievability is a very high factor in grants. I want to know they have enough money that they're going to be able to actually implement the program. So it's really not about underbidding. It's really about showcasing how you can once again manage projects and implement projects and manage money, okay? So FOA and RFP, those are two of the words, right? This is how you're gonna find out. And this is basically what they are, is the grant guidelines. All right, so here's a crazy slide, but I like to show it because this is on grants.gov. So Raquel, if you want to drop in grants.gov, just so people have that link. But this is, and I took a screenshot of this because I also have a little arrow pointing down, if you guys can see, that says eligibility. So if you go to grants.gov, it's completely free. This is the federal website. This is where those 26 grant making agencies actually have to publish their grant applications or their FOAs, right? So, and on the side here, you can go down, you can hit small business. If you're a larger business, they actually have for-profit other than small business as an eligibility clickable as well. And this way it can help sift through a lot of these grants. But what you can do is you can put in keywords. So you can put in New York, or you could put in your subject matter. There was like, you know, arts, creative arts, like there's a pottery, right, business on here. There's arts, a business on here. There was something with nursing as well, mental health. This is where you can put in your keywords, and you can be able to put in, if you are a business, you would want to click on these eligibility functions, just otherwise you could have like, here it's over 1,000, right? You know what I mean? But then you can see like, oh my gosh, like you can really, you can dissect it a little bit more. So this is grants.gov, and this is where you would find the grant, the FOA, the grant application guidelines, to tell you how to write the grant. All right, and Instrumental is one of the foundation places. The only thing with Instrumental is that it is a pay-to-play place, okay? So for grants.gov, federal grants, it is free, always. When you're looking for foundations, there are a lot of places out there, such as Instrumental, and how you, but they do charge, right? And they have different rates. If you have Foundation Directory online, there's a whole bunch of different ones, and they all charge different rates. But I do recommend, if you are going to start really looking for foundations, that you know, you do invest at some point, maybe not right away, to get into some of these softwares. And one of the things you can look at is your public library, because Foundation Directory Online, which is a grant research platform, they are letting a lot of the libraries utilize their basic plan for free throughout the pandemic. So definitely check out your local library and become a member and see if you can utilize that. But these are just places where you can find grants. And of course, your state grants, right? So you also have monies coming into the state. And sometimes that's from the federal government, called pass-through monies. But your state also, so I just looked up your state here, your state agency website. And then when I scrolled down, I could see where I could filter, and I could go to the different agencies, so the different departments. So I might go to Health and Human Services and click there, and go to the New York Health and Human Services agency website to really get more information about what grants are available from your state, for like the lady or the gentleman who mentioned they have a mental health, mental illness business, right? So these are definitely wonderful places to go and to look at your state agency websites. They have a lot of opportunities as well. Okay, so the one thing is, once you get these grant applications, these FOAs or RFPs, you have to know how to read them, right? And I know a lot of you said you don't know where to start. Well, I'm going to show you not only where to start, but how to not start with a blank page. Okay, this is a huge golden nugget for you guys out there. Please utilize this. It is my secret tip I'm giving to you, so it's no longer a secret. Take it, use it. This is how you can score higher on grants. And this is how you can eliminate starting from a blank page. In the funding opportunity announcements or the RFPs, right? So you're going to see both of that language interchangeably when they're talking grant application. You're going to see the information on what they want to have in the grant. Normally, you're also going to see a score or a criteria such as this one. So it might be on the top. They might have something about the project description. It can't be longer than 25 pages. We want to know the area to be served, right? And then also sometimes you might just see the points for each section. This is your golden ticket right here to framework your grant. So let me show you how. Okay, what I like to do is actually use their FOA and turn it into a Word doc and actually start my headers and everything with the language, the exact language that they use. This is going to help me score higher. Let me show you how. So I would take this and I would say, okay, here's the top. The top part is what's actually in a FOA. This is a real one, by the way. The bottom half is what I would write. I would say, I'm going to actually call this program design. I'm going to say 1.A, community eligibility and assessment of community needs. You see their A, exact same words. And then I'm going to say the area to be served, and I'm going to bold that because they say identify the area to be served, right? I'm going to tell them it's here. I'm using my where I'm at for you guys, little context there. But I'm going to say the project name, where it is, the community to be served, just like they're asking for. I'm going to bold it, and I'm going to be very specific, 100 Indigenous makerspace entrepreneurs. Okay, and then I'm going to keep going and responding to exactly what they're asking for. Now, what this is going to do, like I said, is two things. You are no longer going to start from a blank page. And you can see even at the bottom there, I have highlighted in a turquoise, like Holly, fill in this later. You don't have to have every part of your information ready to do this. When you look at the FOA, copy and paste it, put it in a Word doc, fill out what you can, and then add little notes for yourself to come back to. Okay, and this is gonna, now you're not starting with a blank page. Now you know what information you need to find. Now you know how to write this. It's just a framework, really. So you wanna respond. And why this is also another thing. So not only does it help you start where you're not starting from a blank page, but remember, let's go back up to this slide real quick. If they have a score sheet, grant reviewers, they get all these grants in, they get say 300 grants in, they can only award 10. Right? So they have a score sheet. So they also have text here. This is what you need to write. Now they have a score sheet, and they only have 5 reviewers, and they're each going to be reviewing like a whole bunch of grants, right? So now this is going to take a lot of time, right? They're going to get tired. They only have a certain amount of time. Usually, I will tell you, in a federal, when you review federal grants as a peer reviewer, there's 3 peer reviewers, and you usually get about 14 grants in about 10 days to review those grants. That might seem like a lot of time. It's not. Okay, you get tired. People are human, and they have to score according to this. Not about how you make your grant sound very like emotional or anything like that. It's about you have to use this, you have to score it with this. So as a reviewer now, if you're bolding these things that I have to score, you're automatically going to score higher, right? Automatically. So this is a really good way for you to score higher and just to know where to start. Okay, so let's move on to the next part. Strings attached to funding sources. So now that you know what federal grants are, what state grants are, what foundation grants are, and you know how to start, how to find grants, and how to actually start scoring higher immediately, now we need to also address what are the strings attached, because you might say, I'm ready to go get that $1 million right now, and it's gonna be so easy. Well, let's also just make sure our mind's in the game, right? So we need to think of grants that there are strings attached. So you can think of a grant as access to fund certain projects for your nonprofit or government agency. They have stipulations, right? Startup capital with firm execution timelines, supplemental funds for your program. So you don't want to think of grants are going to fund your entire business, and that's all you need is this one funding stream. No, think of it like a supplement. Think of it like I still have to deliver. It's not just free to do whatever I want with it. You have to write certain things. You could see how specific that funding opportunity announcement was, and you have to deliver on those, right? So if you don't utilize the grant specific, they may need to be paid back. You can get blacklisted from organizations from applying again if you do not manage the money right. You might only be able to draw down monies to reimburse expenses. That's how a lot of grants do work. You show receipts, they reimburse you. So you also have to think of, do I have money to roll up front, right? And like I said, you may need receipts for reimbursements. So this part is really short, but I just wanted to make sure that you know that there are strings attached to grants, and it is going to take your time. Okay, so now let's get into the myths and truths of grants before we wrap up today. And we have your questions for you, or you have questions for us. Okay, so here's just a quick little quiz. So if you think there are thousands of grants out there for any project or organization, you may think, oh my gosh, yeah, there's so many. We just saw, you just showed me, Holly, on grants.gov, there's like thousands, right? Well, that was just small business for the entire nation for any program. You may think that grants are free money and you can do whatever you want with them. No, remember, we just talked about grants come with strings attached, or that they're super easy to get. No, they have to be, grants are competitive. And you might think you can pay off your student loan, your car debt, etc. Nope, right? They're not for your personal use. So let's go ahead and look at this real quick. So our first myth is there are thousands of grants out there for any project or organization. The truth is that when you really nail it down for your specific program, there may be only a handful of grants, but those are going to be excellent fit grants, right? So why is this such a common misconception? Because there are so many grants available, but it's just not specifically for, like, maybe you find 10 that are a great fit for that pottery activity that somebody was talking about, right? Maybe there is 8 for the mental health for a certain population in a certain area, right? So, but those are going to be really good fit, right? And the thing is we only hear about the grants that people win. We don't hear about all the grants they wrote that they didn't win, right? So it also is like, oh, why is that nonprofit? They're so successful, and they might be, but they probably also get a ton of rejection because they're putting themselves out there and they're writing a ton of grants, right? So we also need to think about rejection is okay in the grant world. It's you need to write, and write to the right places, okay? Now let's go ahead and look at myth number 2. Grants are free money and you can do whatever you want with it. The truth is that grants are not free money. There is an exchange. Funding sources don't sit around asking each other, how can we just blow through our money to pay off your debt, right? You have to stick to the budget. You have to really think about the priority of the funding source you're asking money from, right? Like, I want to have a relationship with them. Almost think like you want to interview them, right? Before you enter into a relationship with them, because that's what it's going to be. So you definitely have to stick to your budget. If you don't stick to your budget, you might not get monies reimbursed. You may have to pay them back if you don't stick to your budget as well, right? So you really have to understand that, yes, they can be monies that you never have to pay back. But if you mismanage things, you may have to, or you may not get those monies reimbursed. So it is really important to really understand what grants are. Myth number 3, grants are super easy to get. Well, this is definitely not true. Grants are extremely competitive. Yeah, we saw there's like 500,000 of them out there from the federal government, but there's a lot of nonprofits. There's a lot of businesses competing for them. It's not to say don't go after them, but it is to say go after the right ones and really understand what they are. Grants do have a very rigid and thorough review process. And with more and more nonprofits getting started, the competition always increases. And like I said, sometimes there's only 7 grants available and there's hundreds of applicants. But even if you get a rejection, you guys, man, they give you feedback, right? They give you feedback. You can take that feedback, you can submit again the next funding cycle. Because you've created a program, that's what you're doing with your grant. You can also use that to ask for corporate solicitation monies, to publish on your website, social media posts, etc. Grants are really beautiful because you're basically creating a business plan. Okay, and myth number 4 before we close up today is I might as well just get a card or get a grant to pay off my student loan or car. Grants are not loans, right? Grants don't fund consumerism. However, sometimes there are some grants available. Like right now, I hear on Guam, the gas prices, oh my gosh, guys, they're almost $6 a gallon here. So the governor, she did put out grants for $300 for certain, if you have a certain income, you can get $300 every month to help offset petrol, right? So yes, the government can release certain types of grants for things, but like just to pay off your debts in general, that usually doesn't happen. Certain businesses can get certain things paid back though, okay, for what, because it's for your business, but I'm talking about individual consumerism. All right, so of course, the answer to all of these is the C, so in our little quiz, but that's what we have today. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. And just if you guys want any more information, Raquel can also drop in the rest of the links that we have, grant writing and funding. We have a ton of free resources in our podcast. So now I'm gonna hand it back over to Rose. And I am going to keep my screen up. I think she would like me to, and we can enter into questions. All right, Rose, are you here? There she is.
And I turned on my audio, so now you can hear me. I wanted to announce the people who will be receiving Holly's book, The Beginner's Guide to Grant Writing. Alessandro Crocco, Crocco, Catherine Sikula, Sikule, Monique McDonald, and Stacy McKenna. So congratulations to you, and I'll be sending that out. I'll get your email addresses and I'll email you and find out where to send it. Okay. So I've been collecting some of the questions, Holly, and there are some that are have come in multiple times. One question was, do you have to be an established NGO to apply for a grant?
No. So as we saw, it really depends. When I was showing the grants.gov screen, if you were on the webinar at that point in time, you can click on different eligibility. So even if you're a higher education, right, university, that sort of thing. So there's different eligibility for different organizations. There's even grants for individuals. I know I just talked about consumerism, but what I'm talking about more is like there's grants for fellowships and there's grants for other scholarships and that sort of thing. However, if you are looking for a grant, you're forming a nonprofit, and you want to get money for that nonprofit, but you're just not tax exempt yet, you might want to push forward with your tax exemption first to get that done. And if you're a business, you know, same thing, you can apply for grants, but you have to make sure you're eligible. If those grant funding sources are only giving grants out to nonprofit, tax exempt organizations, you would not be eligible for those types of grants.
Okay. So there'll be a few questions people are asking about. They're starting a for-profit business and they want to know a little bit more about where to find those grants and how much can they get.
Mm-hmm. So there's different places to find grants for business, right? And a lot of times you might look at your SBA, right? If you have a small business development center like an SBDC, that's another great resource. I think this is actually, you're sponsored by SBA, right, Rose? This,
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So they're the Economic Development Authority. So your local Economic Development Authority usually has grants available for businesses as well. So it's definitely, you know, and then you could go to grants.gov like we just did and click on small business and you can find grants that are eligible or for small businesses. Foundations, some of them give it out to for-profit businesses as well. You just need to read those FOAs or the funding opportunity announcements and RFPs. It does take a little bit of time and research to look for them, but it's well worth it. And as far as your second part of that question, how much money, it just depends, right? Every funding source is different. If you're just starting up and you're just starting to look for grants, like I mentioned before, you know, even those $500 mini grants, they can start building your portfolio, right? Those are the lower hanging ones, like the Walmart Foundation. I don't know if they necessarily give to for-profit businesses or just nonprofits, but that would be something to look into. And then start building from there, right? So you definitely, there are grants, especially now for businesses, and that can be really, really helpful. I think, you know, they finally realized, yes, businesses need money, right? They need cash flow. So there's a lot of different types of funding out there.
I will say that SCORE does offer some grants. They offer them through other organizations. Like recently we had a FedEx grant and it came through SCORE. So if you happen to be in the SCORE database, you would get information like that, or you can go on the site, score.org, and look for those. Okay, somebody wants to know if there's reports that they have to send in after they've used the money.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's going to vary per funding source, right? So and it's going to vary the type of grant you get too. So every funding source, and what I mean by that is like if you get a grant from the Department of Interior, let's just say, or Department of Education, to run a program, they're going to have their own criteria for the different reports, and they're going to tell you these are the type of reports that we want, this is how often, etc. And even a foundation, say if you got from the Target Foundation, and it's a $5,000 grant, they might just want one closeout grant after you finish spending the money, right? So it just depends once again on the funding source. But yes, you also need to track your progress. Whatever you said you're going to do, make sure you're tracking that and keeping documentation of it so you can include that in your report.
Okay. So Holly wants to know if grants always involve providing education.
No, there's so many different types of grants out there. There's grants for prevention programs for, let's just say substance abuse. There's grants for conservation efforts. There's great grants for just funding your operations, right? Workforce development. There's grants for all types of programs. So sometimes it's just grants for keeping the lights on, like those operating expenses. We saw a lot of that with the EIDL and the PPP, right? And different grants coming out during COVID just to help businesses keep their lights on, especially like restaurants and that sort of thing.
And Linda says she knows about community development block grants, and she's wondering if they still exist.
They do. Yes, they do. So community development block grants, the CDBG, right? They have a lot of different programs that can help in your communities and them specifically are really cool because some of them offer like capital, grants, which is like building, and it's harder to find sometimes like the actual construction grants of building something. So like building a community center or putting the lights in a baseball field, those kind of things. So yeah, they still operate.
Okay. So Michelle says she started a nonprofit organization to create transitional housing for domestic violence survivors.
Mm-hmm.
She was blessed to be introduced to a director of West County Office for Women, along with others. However, they are extremely busy. What do you recommend the first thing I do to acquire funds? I was going to begin by selling items to family, friends, and online to raise money. So she's pretty much wants to know how can she get started raising money?
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's Michelle. Is that?
Yeah.
Michelle, yeah, that's a great idea because, and like I said, what funding sources want to see are the two things. Remember how to implement programs and how to manage money. So if you're selling like items, and I actually know another lady in Michigan who does something very similar, and she makes organic candles and sells them as a product to raise money for her nonprofit to help survivors. And it's really cool to see just like creativity and stuff like that, because you also want to be able to say, hey, I know how to manage money. So if you can start with crowdfunding, if you can start with other fundraisers, creating products, even doing services, maybe you do some counseling and you charge for that, maybe a lower rate, right? And these are also streams of income that are diverse. So you'd have services, products, fundraisers, crowdfunding, corporate sponsors, and grants, right? That would just be another thing. So definitely any way you can get started, even with a simple fundraiser, even with creating a product, is a fantastic idea. And the networking, like you talked about, Michelle, meeting people, getting in the door, right? It's about building relationships. So you're definitely on the right track.
Okay. Arabella is asking about businesses versus nonprofits in terms of qualifying for grants.
Mm-hmm. So once again, they qualify usually for different types of grants. So we're seeing, I'll just give you an example locally so we can have some context to this, is the Guam Economic Development Authority. They've given out certain grants, only businesses are eligible to apply. And that was for general operating support. This year it was also for if you want to create a program. And then they have a grant program only that nonprofits are eligible for, right? And it's from a different funding source. So within even their department. So it really depends. Yes, there's grants available for businesses. And yes, there's grants available for nonprofit organizations, but it's really who is the funding source or what is the program from the funding source that you're eligible for. Sometimes for-profit and nonprofit can compete for the same funding source, but usually it's more specific.
Okay. Tamara wants to know if SCORE has assistance with grant writing. And I'll say, yes, there are webinars on score.org that anyone can hop into. The other thing is check with your SCORE chapter. If they don't have somebody who is skilled in grant writing, they can reach out to the whole country and find someone who can help. Okay. Are there grants for construction? Like revamping a building in order to house a nonprofit?
Yeah, so there's certain grants available for construction. Like I mentioned, that was great that somebody else had brought up the CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant you might want to look into. That's specific for construction. They're a little bit further and fewer apart, but they're definitely out there. And it's, you know, it always goes back to what is the impact on the community though? So we always want to think about not just housing your nonprofit, but what does your nonprofit do? If it's, you know, we can use the other example, if it's going to provide, you know, 100 survivors of domestic violence with services, et cetera, this building, you know, that's the angle you want to take, not just creating a building for a nonprofit. But there's definitely grants available for construction. It's just a little bit harder to get, and there's a little bit fewer out there, but some of them have some big money ticket items too, so it can be good.
Okay. And do you have any idea, once you apply for the grant, how long it takes to get the grant?
Those, once again, it depends. It depends on grants, but you know, with some foundations, they might have an open funding cycle every quarter because their board meets every quarter, right? So those are going to fund a lot quicker. You might submit 1 month and the next month it might get funded. Whereas a federal grant, it's going to take maybe 6 months before you hear back from them because they have such a, and that goes back to the review process, right? They have a more robust review process. So it really depends on who you're submitting for. But I would say even a month is pretty quick, like, you know what I mean, for a foundation. So I would say prepare yourself anywhere between 2 to 6 months, even to a year, before you get funding. And I know it sounds like a long time, but that's why grant writing and grants should only be one of your streams of income. It should not be your only one.
And Alexandria Reina wants to know if you can get feedback once you're declined for a grant so that you know what to do to get the grant the next time.
Yes, you can always ask for it, but you're not guaranteed to get it. Where you will get more of it is through federal grants because they actually have that review process, et cetera. They have to, people actually have to submit comments. The reviewers have to submit comments and everything. So they have all that information and you usually are able to get that. The ones that are harder to get feedback from are foundations. And sometimes you're just going to get a general email back to say you're disqualified due to the high number of applications we have coming in this cycle. Please submit again. Like, you know, that's all that they really have time because it's a small board of directors, right? So always ask though. I always say ask though. You can kind of follow up and be like, can you give us any feedback though? Call them up if they're in your area. See if you can take out the board, you know, if you can take out a board director to lunch, or you can actually go to their board meeting and present your nonprofit or your business plan for 5 to 10 minutes. You know what I mean? So do try to develop relationships.
And here's a question from Timothy. He wants to know if you have to reside in the state to apply for a grant in that state.
No, not necessarily. I mean, there's a lot of foundations that are only based like, you know, in certain states, of course, but they're giving out because they're giving out to other states and other areas, even overseas, because they're giving out to specific programs. So they might not be geographically concerned, they might be subject concerned, right, to the topic. And for federal, I mean, it's coming from federal. So, and sometimes though, you will see in foundations, once again, this is why you guys all need to read the FOA or the RFP, they might have limitations like in New York. There might be a foundation there that only gives to nonprofits or businesses in the state of New York, and they have, you know, they can do that, right? So you do have to look at that.
Yeah. And do you recommend getting a professional grant writer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really important that you either learn how to write grants and apply yourself or get a grant writer. Getting a grant writer, what's good about getting a consultant is you don't have to put them on your payroll. I know you guys all, right? When you have someone on your payroll, that's a lot of responsibility. Where a consultant, they're just going to do specific work for a specific amount of time for a specific price. So it can be in your budget. I also recommend if you guys do want to have interns coming on, the only thing with interns making an intern write a grant is you need to train them in grant writing. So getting them some type of grant writing training, and then they're going to stick around longer because you're going to actually train them. So there are different ways that you can do it. It is good to at least have an idea if you are hiring somebody to write grants that you understand the grant writing process a bit. But yeah, you can hire someone internally, consultant, have a volunteer, your board of directors, your interns, just make sure you provide grant training.
Mm. So Dana wants to know, she wants to know if she actually has to have an operating program to get a grant, or can she get a grant to start a program?
Yeah, it's to actually, most of them is to start a program, but you have to develop the program. It doesn't mean you need to ignite the program, if you will, but you have to develop a plan for a program. So a lot of grants are about not existing programs necessarily, but about new programs or expanding programs. So you do have to develop the plan, and that's basically what your grant application is the plan and what you're going to do. So you have to be very clear on what you're doing, but it doesn't have to be in existence already.
Okay. And Linda wants to know if you recommend the MWBE, which is a Minority Business Owners certification. What that certification does is it allows you to get state and federal grants or jobs to do work. Are you familiar with those, Holly?
Yeah. I am, and I highly recommend that. Women-owned as well is really good. All of those different certifications will give you extra points. There's even a veterans-owned one. So whatever your major makeup is of your stakeholders of your organization, like my business, it's me, so I'm 100% women-owned. You know what I mean? So, but you have to actually file for the certifications, right? For that. And what that can do is give you some, and it gives you more credibility. It shows that you're really taking care of business stuff, and you can then qualify for certain grants or certain contracts even, right? Even if they're not grants, they could be contracts or bids then that will go towards your preference because you have those points added because of those certifications. So yes, I do recommend them.
Yeah. And someone wants to know, is there a database online to find private foundation grants?
There is. I had mentioned a couple when on the screen. So Instrumental was one, Foundation Directory Online is another, Grant Gopher is another. So there's quite a few, and they all have, but the thing is they usually have a price tag attached to it. And that's why I did mention, check out your public library and ask them if they have a grant research platform available, because Foundation Directory Online, which is an online grant research platform, is allowing their basic plan free to public libraries during this time. So check that out. Mm-hmm.
So there's a couple questions about whether someone should get a grant writer or not, and how much to expect to pay. Like if you're a really small business, small nonprofit, does it pay to get a grant writer?
It really depends, like where you're thinking about developing your streams of income. If you are, you definitely do need a budget for it, right? So I would say most grant writers, they're charging anywhere between 75 to 150 an hour. So, it can be pricey when you're adding that up, or they have certain prices for their services for writing specific grants. But what you can do is, what's always good, and I like to do with my clients too, is write a master grant application template for them, so then they can be sustainable and teach them how to use it, so then they can pull from it again and again. So if you are looking for consultants, you might ask them, would you create a master grant template for me? and then I can use and teach me how to use it, and then I can use it again and again, because you want to learn how to be sustainable, right, in your business. And that can really, really help out a lot.
So William wants a step-by-step how to present a small business grant, like the letters of proposals and so forth. So what might be a good source for him besides your book?
Yeah. My book. No, okay. So yeah, I mean, you can go, there's a lot of different places, even grants.gov. If you go there, that's the federal grant website. They have a lot of free videos on different types of things about grants. The podcasts they have different things, but you can look, there's different books, there's so many resources. So you can look on different platforms. It just depends on how you like to consume information and learn. There's a ton of videos if you're more of a visual person. Like I mentioned, there's podcasts, there's audio, there's books if you like text. So there is a lot of information, but you can go, even I'm sure SCORE chapter, like you said, you have resources. So you want to definitely check out the resources that they can provide, and look around. Yeah. So there are out there.
Yeah. And I'm going to take this last question from Susan. She's an artist and she's asking about getting grants for people to assist in the studio and actually come into the studio, expand the creativity, and take charge of the daily needs. So I'm thinking also doing some of the business management work.
Yeah, I mean, you can definitely put staffing and personnel in your grants, right, when it's allowable. So once again, you just need to make sure you read the FOA and the RFP, because sometimes they will say certain things are not allowable. But as long as it's allowable, you can definitely put staffing into your grant applications, because if it needs to run the program, then you need to have it funded. Like I mentioned before, you never want to kind of like penny pinch and try to come in under and try to cut all corners. If I say, well, don't you need staff for that program to be successful? And should I see that in the budget, right? So there's definitely funding available for staffing and personnel.
So I wanted to do this very last question. I know we're running over. Someone has been awarded a grant and they want to know if something happens along the way, can the money get reallocated if they get permission from the place that gave them the grant?
Yes, you just said the special magic word, and that's permission. So as I've been stressing throughout the webinar, grants are all about developing relationships. So once, and grant funding sources know that things go awry, and even in my grants and all the grants that are, you want to put in contingency plans, because stuff can happen. So it's about communicating then with the funding source. So you usually have like a program officer or somebody that's your direct point of contact from the funding source, that you can then say, hey, look what happened. The pandemic happened. We can't do our outdoor event anymore, whatever, right? And as long as you communicate with them, and you can modify your budget then, and they will tell you what they need for you to modify. But I always say, just tell them up front. Don't just assume that you can modify and then send them a modified budget without talking to them. Do talk to them. They do want to see you successful. They really do. And they really do understand that things come up. So just contact them, ask them how you can modify because of a certain thing that came up, and they will let you know.
Okay, so next slide, you can contact the sponsors. You'll get these slides within a couple days. And the next slide, our next month, we'll be doing Google Basics on May 11th. And next slide, just to let you all know, we are supported by the Small Business Administration. And thank you for your attendance and for your participation. And any more questions, do field them through your SCORE office or any of these email addresses on here. You can contact Holly anytime. Her information is on her website, her email address. So feel free to do that. Any words, Holly?
Oh, I just want to thank the Hudson Sports chapter again for having me here on this wonderful webinar with all you people. And I just want to thank each and every one of you for investing your time into yourself to really learn about grants and the powerful things that they can do for your business and your nonprofit. So thank you once again.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.